Yolanda Robeson Cinema, including Now, Por Primera Vez, Nosotros la Música, Retrato de Teresa, and tomorrow evening at 5:30 p.m. we will screen José Martí, which is a unique portrait of the revolutionary in his childhood. So please come tomorrow to watch that film. Icaic really does show us an example and to the whole world of the profound impact that revolutionary cinema can make. And tonight, we are celebrating the Cuban Revolution, its history, its triumphs. We are so honored to be joined today by Ambassador Deputy Permanent Representative of Cuba to the UN, Yuri Gala, who will speak about July 26th. We are also tonight launching a new title from 1804 Books and Casa De Las Américas, Haydee Speaks of the Moncada, a new translation of a discussion held in 1968 between Haydee Santamaría and young people in Cuba. And I see some of you in the audience already have this book, so I'm really, really glad to see that, and I think it will be transformative to read. Through Haydee's words, we get an inside look at the unique experience of fighting on the front lines of a liberation struggle. This book serves as an important point of reference in building a revolutionary movement, society, and culture, which we must study today as we encounter new battles at every turn in movements around the world. This evening, we will hear from Manolo de los Santos about the book and about Haydee Santamaría's legacy, and then Kate Gonzalez of 1804 Books will read an excerpt. We are also thrilled to welcome our dear friend, Grammy Award-winning musician Arturo O'Farrell to the stage at TPF tonight. Who will close out the evening with music and homage to the Cuban Revolution. And finally, tonight we are opening a very special exhibition of posters produced by Casa de las Américas in 2022, commemorating the 100 years since Haydee Santamaría's birth. This series of posters is a choir of voices of 10 contemporary Cuban designers in homage to Haydee Santamaría, the woman, the revolutionary, and the cultural figure. Few people have made as profound an impact on revolutionary movements around the globe as Haydee Santamaría. Through her ideas, wisdom, and revolutionary spirit, we are brought to action as artists, cultural workers, and revolutionaries today. The Cuban designers that are represented in this collection of screen-printed posters bring Cuba's legacy of poster making into the present moment and inspire the next generation of artists, cultural workers, and designers who are taking up the necessary task of documenting, illuminating, and envisioning a revolutionary path forward. So with that, I am very happy to welcome Director of the People's Forum, Manolo de los Santos, to the stage.
Hi, everyone. It's good to have you all here. Okay. So today is obviously a very special day for the Cuban people when they commemorate the 26th of July. But I think this date also has deep importance for young people, but also for revolutionaries all over the world. It was Fanon, writing in the context of the Algerian Revolution, who spoke that each generation, out of relative obscurity, had to discover its mission. But upon discovering that mission, it either had to fulfill or betray it. And we can speak today about the victory of the Cuban Revolution because there was a generation in the 1940s, early 50s, in a time in which the rule of the US, of their corporations, had taken over Cuba. A moment in history in which some people could say there was democracy, but for the vast majority of poor and working Cubans, there was only dictatorship of capital, the dictatorship of poverty and misery. In the midst of all of that, a group of young people said they wanted to transform the world. They understood clearly what their mission was. Their mission was no other than to find sovereignty and independence for the Cuban people. Independence at all costs. Independence by any means. And I think it's important for us, particularly the young people today, those of us who have been on the front lines of struggle for the last 9 months, fighting for Palestinian liberation, fighting alongside the Palestinian people, but fighting alongside also the young people of the planet who echo the same message, that we want a world with sovereignty and dignity. For us, Haydee is a shining star. Haydee, like the Cuban people, is not a model to copy and paste, but is in fact an example of what it actually means to be revolutionaries in difficult times. I encourage everyone here, but also those watching online, when you're on the metro, when you're on the subway, when you're on your way home after a long day of work, when you get the chance to skim through this book, to glance through the words of a very simple woman. Simple in that she was born out of the roots of the Cuban people. Simple in that she preferred most times to act rather than speak. Simple in that she refused to accept what was being told to her was acceptable and normal. Haydee grew up precisely on a plantation, on a sugar plantation, where she got to see on a day in and day out the pain and suffering of what most ordinary Cubans had to go through in that period of time. And she grew up insisting and asking the question that all revolutionaries end up having burning within them. What are we going to do? Are we simply going to accept that Cuba must stay this way forever? And she came through a long process of struggle, a long process of discovery, to understand fundamental questions which we are beginning to understand as well here, which is that there can be no change without organization. That there can be no change, no transformation, if we don't actually have a collective project. That there can be no change if we don't actively try to transform the minds and the hearts of the people around us, however hard that may seem. So I strongly encourage, again, that we come back to Haydee, that we go into the past of the Cuban Revolution, that we think about those 160 young people who woke up early one morning and went to the Moncada without knowing if they were going to come back or not, but who understood what their mission was, who understood ultimately that failure and setbacks are actually a very common part of struggle, but that it is never the end of the story, that it is in fact simply a new opportunity to reassess and to rebuild the process in which people, ordinary human beings, become extraordinary revolutionaries. That is what Haydee teaches us. We are honored here at the People's Forum to have done this project in collaboration with Casa De Las Américas, because for us, Casa De Las Américas, its workers, the people who inhabit that casa, everyone from Abel Prieto, all the wonderful people who work there, have been incredibly generous with us. They have consistently opened their doors. Hannah and I just showed up at Casa De Las Américas a couple of months back, maybe in May, June, and we said, we're finally finishing the book, we're ready to print it. We're trying to think of an exhibit to accompany this process. Do you have any ideas? And 5 minutes later, the staff of Casa come up with this beautiful exhibit that they donated to the People's Forum. Wow. when we said to them, in fact, originally, you know, we want to promote the thinking of Cuban revolutionaries. We want to publish books by Cuban revolutionaries. You know, we're having a hard time getting copyrights. The next morning, we had the manuscript of this book in our inbox with a very simple message. Don't let the spirit of Haydée die. And we find it, as we discover our mission in the year 2024, that our mission is not a ceasefire. Our mission is not the end to one conflict. Our mission is to liberate the people and the planet. And we know for a fact that along that long path, which will have its ebbs and flows, it will have its high and beautiful moments like the ones we're living now, but will also have its low and difficult moments. People like Haydée will be walking alongside us. Not as simply a spiritual matter, but Haydée walks and stands and shouts and affirms in every action that we take that moves the struggle forward. So I thank you all for being here. We're immensely honored to have an artist of the people, Arturo Farrell, with us today. We're honored to have our friends from the Cuban Mission to the UN. We're honored to have young people who have been active and struggle. We're honored simply that we have this opportunity to talk, to exchange, and to build forward. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you so much, Manolo. Now we're going to bring up to the stage Kate Gonzalez to read a section of the Haydee Santamaría book.
Hello, everyone. It's an absolute honor to be reading Haydée's words tonight, especially on such an occasion such as tonight. Like Manolo was saying, I mean, this book kind of says it all. It's not just a pitch about the book, but also a pitch about learning about the revolution, because in this very small book, you learn so much about not only Haydée, but also Cuba, because it's a conversation between young people of a revolution almost 10 years after its victory and one of its leaders. And it's a really interesting conversation to witness. You see them, you see the young people extracting answers out of her. You see them curious. You're not just learning about the very human person that a leader of a revolution can be, but you're also learning about the people, the young generation that's trying to build a revolution. So I'm actually going to read maybe a couple of sections from Haydée, but I encourage you all to get it because it's really a beautiful book. And even though she doesn't want to speak so much, she says so much in the little words she gives us. So this is from the beginning of the book when she's asking even why she's there speaking about it. She says, "We have asked ourselves why, if we have lived after the Moncada, the Sierra Maestra, and before the Sierra, the underground, if we survived the battles of 1959 and later Huron, historic events, why is the Moncada different from all the others? But this does not mean that we love one more than the other. At times I've said, I don't know if it was in an interview or speaking to someone else, that the reason for this came to me very clearly when my son was born. When my son was born, there were difficult moments, moments equal to those that any woman has when she's in labor, very difficult ones. There were moments of terrible pain, pain that tore my insides, and on the other hand, there was also the strength to keep from crying or screaming or cursing. When such pain occurs, one curses, shouts, and cries, but how do you have the strength not to cry and curse when there is pain? Because a child is coming. In those moments, I realized what the Moncada was. Despite those pains, that feeling of being lost, that anguish, more pain than any pain, how could we not curse, and how could we not cry, and how could we remain as calm as we were? We think that only through knowing that the arrival of something great is coming can those pains be resisted. The arrival of the child we have been awaiting, they cannot be greeted with tears or screams. Above all, I speak of the first child. The first is not loved more than the second or more than the last, but the first one is different. We are not prepared to receive them. We do not know if we will be able to endure the pain. We do not know if we will be a good mother. We do not know if we will know how to raise them. That experience produces something different for the second and third or others who come later, because we already know that we can resist, that we do know how to raise them. We want that second or third child just like the first, but that first child is the unexpected one. It is the one we can never be fully prepared for. And through that experience, it was very clearly revealed to me what the Moncada had been. It was not the fact that we could love one action most or best, but that it was the first. That first child we were not sure we could face, how much we would be able to endure. And perhaps we were prepared to see some people die, to leave there those who should have lived for many more years. But the unexpected also happens. We were not prepared to experience what we experienced there. There, we realized that the problem was not to change one man. The problem was to change the system. But it also becomes clear that if we had not gone there to change a man, perhaps the system would not have been changed. In prison, we thought much about how much we had left to do and the enormous willpower it would take to do it. Because we always remember, and it is as fresh in our mind as if it were that first day, that when Abel told us, after this, it is going to be more difficult to live than to die. Therefore, you have to be braver than us, because we are going to die, and you, Melba and Haydee, have to live. You have to be stronger than us. This is the harder thing to do. The next section I'm going to read is actually her reflecting on the night before the attack, what it's like to be among your comrades when you're on the precipice of something that you don't know what's going to come, where you don't know what's going to happen next, what it's like to be at the forefront of a revolution, right? And this is a student asking the question. Comrade Haydee, I have a question regarding the eve of the attack on the Moncada barracks. We want to know what made the strongest impression on you on the night of July 25 before the attack on Moncada. And she says, if I could put myself there, I could say more. If you want me to return to that moment and imagine myself there, I felt like a girl going to her quinceañera. That night was one of the most joyful of nights. I couldn't tell you what impressed me the most that night because everything was impressive. It moved me that I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew it would be something great. I did not know if I would see the sunshine of my homeland ever again, which alone is something worth living for. But I knew that if I did not see it again, that too would be great. That night was a night of life because we wanted to see, feel, look at everything that we might never see, feel, or look at again. Everything becomes more beautiful when you think it might be the last time you see it. When we went out into the courtyard, the moon was bigger and more brilliant, the stars were bigger and brighter, the palms taller and greener. The faces of our friends were faces that we might never see again, but we knew we would have them with us forever. And that is why the biggest impression of that night was that everything was more beautiful, everything was bigger, everything was lovelier, and everything finer. We felt ourselves to be better. We thought of our parents and we saw them as kinder, forgetting if they had ever scolded or beaten us unfairly. I was thinking of my little niece, and I found her to be the most beautiful girl on earth, because perhaps I thought I would never see her or hold her again. And everything was more beautiful, infinitely beautiful. The night was more beautiful. It was like something that we deserved to see for the rest of our lives, but maybe we would not ever see it again. I looked at Abel, and it comforted me to think that if I never saw him again, it would be because I, too, no longer lived. But I looked at him anyway. We looked at Fidel, and there was something that told us he would live, that he might be the only one who would live because he had to live. And we looked at him thinking that if we could not see him again, we wouldn't stop looking at him for a minute. Comrades, maybe it would be different to go to battle today, or maybe not. Maybe it would be the same. But at least at that time, really, what I remember most was the beauty that was all around us, in nature, in human beings. We found everything so magnificent that in those moments before leaving, even the useless stools that we had laughed at 2 or 3 days before looked so beautiful to us. So if you ask me what I remember most that night, it was everything, because everything was beautiful. All right, I have one more. But I know you already want to get the book. This last part is actually a very long question from a student, and it's one of the reasons that it was so important to keep the students' questions in this book. Because what interesting questions students ask when they're in the middle of a socialist revolution, right? So I'll read the student's question and then Haydee's response. So an audience member says, I believe that I am not alone in wondering something. At the beginning, you said that right after the Moncada, you realized that changing the leadership of the country was not enough, that we needed to transform the system. Then you explained that you went there as José Martí, and you continue to be disciples of Martí, but that you are also Marxist-Leninists, like so many others who have subsequently committed ourselves to the development of the revolution. However, what we would like to know, since it is a personal experience, is more about the psychological shift that comes with the deepening of consciousness and with becoming a Marxist. What with all the propaganda around communists being the antichrist, unpatriotic, all those things. Was that a painful experience of deepening your conscience until you were convinced that it was through Marxism that you could build prosperity in Cuba? In your experience, how did that process of transformation come about? Through reading, study circles? How did you come to your conviction of Marxism-Leninism? And so Haydee says, look, comrade, in this case, I have to speak very personally. Nothing that exists and nothing that is proposed to us in life as a necessity is painful. So we considered the necessities of our conditions, and the transformation was normal, like a person growing up, like a child who is born and then doesn't know how to walk. First they stand, then walk, then run, then they are 10 years old, then 15, and then 20. That is how it felt when it was presented to me. I cannot speak for all comrades in this case. First, the transformation had to be total. Then it had to be ours, absolutely ours. And since necessity itself is not painful, well, there it is. As we continued to carry out tasks, functions, we began to see the need to make a new man, a new consciousness. We thought, how is that done? Well, also by transforming the system, and that the system becomes capable of transforming man. There is a need for a doctrine in order to transform man, and it was easy for us to find it. What I did not want was a false doctrine. I did not accept a false doctrine before or after Moncada. Because in my personal case, comrade, being a communist is not just being a militant in a party. To me, being a communist is to have an attitude towards life.
Thank you, Kate. What beautiful words from Haydee Santamaría that we will be thinking about for so long into the future, and that inspire our movement and what we're working on today, all of the various tasks and responsibilities and struggles that we face right now. So with those beautiful words in our minds, I am really pleased to introduce to the stage Ambassador Deputy Permanent Representative of Cuba to the UN, Yuri Gala.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Manolo. Thank you all for being here. Cuba sí. Cuba sí. Cuba sí. Gracias. Good afternoon to you all. Buenas tardes. Buenas noches ya casi. Dear friends all, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to attend this special evening of commemoration that includes the launch of a new title, Haydee Speaks of Moncada, as was introduced just recently, as well as the exhibition opening for the spark that lit the Cuban Revolution, a collection of posters created in homage to Haydee Santamaría. And this is also taking place during a week of activities organized by the People's Forum to mark the 65th anniversary of the foundation of ICAI, which is the Cuban Institute on Cinematographic Arts and Industry, and the same anniversary for the Casa De Las Américas. So it's really, really an honor and a pleasure to take part of this event when we're marking such an important anniversary for those two relevant institutions of the Cuban Revolution. On behalf of the Cuban mission to the United Nations, as well as the relevant Cuban institutions, allow me to convey to the organizers our deep appreciation for making possible not only this evening's event, but also the week-long program of activities, including the screening of some iconic Cuban films. Thank you, and I kindly ask the audience here to give a big round of applause to those organizers. Dear friends, today, July 26 is a very symbolic day for the Cubans who are patriotic and for all friends of the Cuban Revolution. In Cuba this morning took place the main event for the 71st anniversary of the assault of the Moncada and Carlos Manuel de Céspedes barracks. Army General Raúl Castro and the President of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel, presided over the event in the province of Santi Espíritus. And on behalf of the Cuban people, more than 5,000 people gathered at that event. Also present in that event, more than 140 friends from all over the world who went to Cuba to take part of these celebrations. And the keynote speaker of the event was the Vice President of Cuba, Salvador Valdés Mesa. But in a day like today, July the 26th, it is incumbent to say a few words about the young people who 71 years ago came to change national history in the early morning of that Carnival Day in Santiago de Cuba back in 1953. So taking advantage of the hustle and bustle of the Carnival of 1953 in Cuba, the assault on the Guillermo Moncada barracks, the second military fortress of the Batista dictatorship, took place. An action with which the centennial generation would start the small engine that started the big engine of the revolution until today. Army General Raúl Castro, one of the young assailants of that group, when he was 22 years old, said later, reflecting on that action, that, and I would quote, if Karl Marx said of the Paris communards that they tried to take the sky by assault, then of the attack on the Moncada by several dozen young men armed with shotguns to kill birds, someone should say that they tried to take the sky by surprise, end of quote. And here we are, dear friends all, 71 years later, because the Cuban Revolution has continued its victorious march without giving in or surrendering, and building instead a society that seeks to provide for the welfare of its people and has had to face enormous external challenges in the process, such as the unjust blockade that has lasted more than 60 years. Now, the Moncada was the resumption of the revolution so many times frustrated since 1868 by the breakdown of unity or foreign interference. The young men who here in Santiago or in Bayamo threw themselves into combat without fear, neither of bullets nor of repression nor of death, gave their lives in the first place for Martí's ideal of conquering all justice. So July 26, 1953 marked a definitive turning point in the Cuban historical evolution. It marked the course we have followed up to the present times. It coined truth of permanent value. It established ethical principles for all times and defined the invariable attitude to maintain in the face of dangers, challenges, and difficulties, no matter how insurmountable they may seem. So tonight's event here at the People's Forum takes place in the year, it should be recalled, in which the Cuban Revolution has reached the 65th anniversary of its triumph back in January 1959. And on that, I like to recall some words mentioned by Raúl Castro precisely on January the 1st of this year, when he said, and I quote, "Many have been the challenges we have had to face to get here, but it has been worth it. The work of the revolution and its social achievements, even in the midst of difficulties, corroborated this," end of quote. And Raúl also pointed out that if the current challenges and difficulties have been greater has been the work of the revolution, which constitutes its best and irrefutable defense against the well-known lies. It is a palpable and tangible work in any corner of Cuba. And for those of you who have gone to Cuba recently, you might have seen what the Cuban people and the Cuban society is going through in a way to overcome the challenges, but in a creative resistance mode. The revolution has dignified Cuba and the Cubans. So, while it has been implemented for many decades, it has to be recalled that since 2017, the Cuban people have endured an unparalleled and excessive tightening of the US blockade. During the Trump administration, more than 200 measures were adopted against Cuba to tighten that 60 years old blockade with a clear aim. The target was to suffocate sensitive sectors of the Cuban economy. The aforementioned maximum pressure policy, unfortunately, remains in force with the current US administration and in full application. The policy of permanent hostility and blockade of the US government is, no doubt about it, the main cause of the difficulties of our economy. The statistics are very clear. We are in the process of updating the annual relevant report that the UN General Assembly will consider sometime in October, and their updated statistics will be shown. But just to recall from last year's report, in terms of illustrating better the impact of the US blockade on Cuba. In a period of a year, the damages caused by that blockade were estimated last year in about $5 billion US, only in 12 months of that study or analysis, close to $5 billion. Now, what that figure means, just to give you a better picture of that, well, $5 billion US means more than 400 millions per month, more than 13 millions per day, close to 500,000 per hour. So the time that this event will last, by the time we get to the closing time, we will be suffering close to 1 million in damages because of the US blockade on the island. So the blockade is not only a challenge to the ethics and humanism, it is in fact a violation of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and international law. The blockade, it has to be said, is a clear, massive, flagrant, and systematic violation of the human rights of all the people of Cuba. The General Assembly, as I mentioned, has considered this issue every year. And last year, that democratic body of the United Nations, the most democratic body of the United Nations, expressed once again rejecting that policy of blockade. And Cuba presented the traditional resolution that was adopted with a positive vote of 187 member states of the United Nations. With that, one can conclude that the overwhelming majority of the international community supports the need to lift the US blockade on Cuba. And there's no doubt about it, because 187 countries cannot be wrong. So the Cuban people and Cuba and the friends of the Cuban Revolution are on the right side of history, and we will continue that fight until the blockade is lifted. The human damage caused by the blockade cannot be measured. No Cuban family is spared from the effects of this inhumane blockade. And to strengthen that blockade, one has to recall that precisely a few days before the Trump administration was about to end, Cuba was reinserted or reincluded in the unilateral list of state sponsors of terrorism, which is a total lie, and there's no evidence whatsoever that Cuba is a state that sponsors terrorism. What Cuba is a victim of terrorist actions, many of them perpetrated, organized, and carried out from the US territory. So the clear and absolute truth is that Cuba does not sponsor terrorism, but is a victim instead, and has continued cooperating with all the relevant bodies of the United Nations, has cooperation agreements with a number of countries all over the world to fight terrorism, because we have a principled position on that issue. Dear friends all, the Cuban nation has demonstrated and will continue to demonstrate its will to resist and move forward in the face of obstacles. The successful battle waged by Cuba against COVID-19 was just a recent example of that. The efforts carried out by Cuba were not limited to our borders. we made our humble contribution to other countries in a manner consistent with our internationalist vocation. And in this regard, dear friends, allow me to mention just a couple of examples of what the Cuban Revolution has done in that front. During these 6 decades of the Cuban Revolution, 600,000 Cuban health professionals have provided collaboration efforts in more than 165 countries of the world. And during COVID-19, more than 3,000 members of the Henry Reeve contingent provided services in 40 of those countries. Another example, more than 27,000 young people from 100 nations have graduated from the Latin American School of Medical Sciences, ELAM, in Cuba. $27,000 young people. And more than 4 million low-income people in our region and in Africa have recovered their sight with the so-called Operation Miracle carried out by Cuba specialists in a number of countries, including here in our region. And more than 70,000 foreign students have graduated in Cuba, and currently more than 3,000 young people are studying in our island, including a number of US students that have gone to Cuba to study medicine and to become medical doctors. We're very proud of that contribution as well. The permanent will to practice solidarity, this is also the Cuban Revolution. It's in our social fabric, it is in our hearts and minds as revolutionaries from a small country in the Caribbean. Because we share the deep conviction that what is needed is doctors, not bombs. What is needed is cooperation and not sanctions. What is needed is solidarity. What is needed is friendship. In our case, and let me repeat it once again, it's not about providing others what we have to spare, but to modestly sharing the small and little resources that we have. That's our motto. So rest assured, dear friends, that Cuba will continue to fight against the blockade, against the designation in that arbitrary list of state sponsors of terrorism, against hostility, and rest assured that our revolution will never be surrendered. We are on the right side of history. We are doing the right thing. And with that, allow me to conclude by reaffirming what was expressed precisely today by the Vice President of Cuba, Salvador Valdez Mesa, in Santi Spiritu in the main event on July 26th commemoration. And I quote, "We are not sitting around waiting for the blockade to be lifted and for us to be removed from the list of alleged sponsors of terrorism, which causes so much harm by constantly inhibiting access to credit and foreign financing, discouraging potential foreign investors, and hindering the arrival of necessary equipment and technologies, among other negative impacts. We have reached this point, and we will continue to be here, thanks to the exemplary capacity for resistance, the knowledge acquired as a result of the revolutionary work, and especially to the unwavering determination of Cubans to fight and to win. So, friends, long live the solidarity movement with Cuba in the United States. Long live the 26th of July, always and forever. ¡Viva el 26 de julio! ¡Viva, ¡Viva la Revolución Cubana! ¡Viva! ¡Venceremos! ¡Venceremos! ¡Cuba sí! No. ¡Cuba sí! No. ¡Let Cuba live! ¡Let Cuba live! ¡Let Cuba live! ¡Let Cuba live! Muchas gracias. Gracias.
Cuba sí. Cuba sí. Thank you so much, dear Ambassador Yuri Gala, for those words, for the memory, for the history of July 26th. The spirit of the Moncada lives on. And we're so honored and grateful to Cuba for providing this example to us. Now it is my pleasure to invite to the stage a dear friend of Cuba and its revolution, Grammy Award-winning Arturo O'Farrill.
Thank you, Manolo. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Yuri. I can't think of a more beautiful thing than to celebrate Cuba and to celebrate my people and to know that even though we struggle, we retain sovereignty. That is the greatest gift that I can think of in today's world, that my people have sovereignty. What a blessing. What an incredible thing to experience. And to be here with you to celebrate that is something I'm emotional. And I hope that my emotions will come out of the notes that I play for you.
Let's give Arturo another round of applause. What a delightful evening, a beautiful performance, an incredible reading. We are so honored and delighted to be celebrating the Cuban Revolution, its art, its culture. I want to thank again deeply Ambassador Yuri Gala and to everyone joining us from the Cuban mission to the UN. Cuba, despite the brutal US blockade, continues to inspire revolutionaries around the world. Thank you to everyone who came out tonight. Please spend the next few minutes lingering here in the People's Forum. Check out the exhibition. These posters are really unique. They're really beautiful examples of contemporary Cuban poster making, design. Read a little bit more about Haydee Santamaría. Read the book. Please, check out the book and learn more about it in the 1804 bookstore. I also encourage everyone to donate to our Bread for Our Neighbors campaign, which is sending 800 tons of wheat flour to Cuba And I invite all of you to join us tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. for our screening of José Martí. To join the People's Forum in our ongoing Revolutionary Summer School, where we're talking about the Cuban Revolution and revolutionary movements around the world. And of course, to join us on Monday nights for our Shut It Down for Palestine volunteer meetings. Cuba sí! Cuba sí! Cuba sí!